Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Houston LaRouche Pack on January 20th, Saturday. And a lot of us are extremely happy today for many reasons. I think we have a task to make the rest of the population happier. I mean, after all, in our Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a major theme. And I think if you think about what most of our fellow citizens are being confronted with, not just daily, hourly, by the minute, by the second, in terms of the various narratives coming at them, you can realize that there's a tremendous sense of pessimism in the population. And I'm even talking about people that were happy a year ago. I think it was today that President Trump was inaugurated. Was it a year ago today? And a lot of people were very happy back then. And you talk to some of those people today and they're not so happy. And that's only because they don't understand the enemy that is trying to destroy humanity. And they don't understand that probably the most unhappy people on the planet today are the British. And that's increasing, and that's a good thing. I wanted to point out a news story that one of my colleagues was telling me about on a conservative radio show in which they were, I'm sure everybody's heard about this horror show out in California, this family, 13 children, horribly abused, tortured. And you just can't believe this would happen in the United States of America, or maybe you could believe it, right? Considering what's happening to the mental facilities of our population. But a conservative radio talk show host is reporting on this, and then he segues to say, and this is the way that Kim Jong-un treats his population in North Korea. Now, what does the situation in this domestic scene in the United States have to do with, quote, the communists? Well, this is what I would call cognitive dissonance. That you're dealing with a population now that are being buffeted by one narrative after another, and they're not being allowed to hear the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But that is changing, and that's why I think right now we should, really be happy about where we are, and be very, very clear. This pamphlet on Robert Mueller, this pamphlet, which I really urge people not just to take and read, but I would urge you to take this. Notice it says $20. Why don't you go out and ask some people to give $20 and contribute to the LaRouche Political Action Committee and Kesha's campaign, as we're going to get into that very shortly. Because what this pamphlet has done is it has catalyzed the kind of fight that the British have always been afraid of. Because I'll say back on this North Korean situation, how many Americans know that the president of South Korea, President Moon, has actually attributed the thawing of relations between North and South Korea in part to President Trump? Have you heard that on the news? Why not? Now, we've all heard about his tweet. My button's bigger than your button, it works better, and we could go on, right? President of South Korea said, I think the American people deserve to know that maybe Trump is doing things, or maybe he's got the potential to do things that could actually end these wars and end what has been decades long of a British geopolitical operation on the planet. And that's what makes us happy here, is when the British are unhappy, we get happier. Not the British people, the British Empire. Now, point out something, for example, was in the Houston Chronicles, it's a cartoon that came out on Thursday, maybe some of you saw it. It's a cartoon of a couple of psychiatrists standing in the background, and you've got a donkey, obviously the Democrats, got a donkey in a straitjacket with a couple of doctors in white coats and a butterfly net, right? And the donkey is being carted away And the doctor is saying to the other doctor, the donkey just got word the president is sane. Now, I think that's useful, but look, it's not the Democrats versus the Republicans. They got it wrong. And I think what you're going to get today from myself and Kesha is that what the enemy's greatest nightmare is that if President Trump is freed up from this coup, from this monkey on his back, from this British Empire, and it is clearly identified how the British Empire has done this, and that's what's coming out, that you have a president who can very, very quickly become the greatest president we've ever had. And there's no question in my mind about that. Not based on simply him, but because we have prepared for decades the solution to what is now unfolding to be the greatest economic collapse in history, which I don't think President Trump understands. I think he understands maybe more than he acts like he does, but it's up to us here to understand what the solutions are, but you also have to know your enemy. Now, I wanted to just go over some highlights. I'm sure you've heard about this in the news, and I really want to not take too much time because Kesha has a lot to say. But think of what's going on. Well, the news today is the government shutdown. Okay, and the news yesterday was some shit show. Excuse my language. I'm sorry. What's that? The government might shut down. Now the government is shut down, and they're meeting today, and we'll find out in another hour what they have to say about that. But what's the real news? The real news is that you have a group of congressmen, and I will hold this pamphlet up again because this pamphlet has been key to unlocking the ability of Congress. Now, admittedly now, it's mostly Republicans, but I think that will change. To actually begin to go after, not the deep state. They may not understand what they're going after, but they're like investigators, and they're digging, and they're finding more and more. And think of what it means that the head of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, has written a 4-page memo in which he has taken material that he has had to fight tooth and nail to pull together. He hasn't gotten it easily from the FBI or the NSA or the DOJ, but he pulled together a 4-page memo which appears to reveal how a dossier written by Christopher Steele, what's he? British MI6 intelligence. That's what he is. A dossier was written by a British MI6 intelligence agent, was never vetted, was never verified, and is the basis, it appears, of a FISA ruling, and FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, passed right after 9/11, so we could be safe from terrorists, don't you know? And that this is so egregious, according to the members of the House Intelligence Committee who've read the memo, that they have voted on Thursday that this be allowed to be read by all members of Congress. You probably know this. And I think it was 129 members of Congress as of yesterday afternoon have read it. Not one Democrat. All Republicans. But like I say, I think that'll change. I think there's a lot of groupthink. I think there's a lot of fear of ostracism. I think that's what's beautiful about Kesha's campaign. And what we're going to be kicking off nationally is an independent slate of candidates. Not necessarily that they're all running independent. Some of them will run Republican. Some of them will run Democrat. But the key thing is that they will be on a mission. We're on a mission to defeat this coup. And let me remind you of something that was in the British London Daily Telegraph just 2 days after President Trump was inaugurated. They had a headline article, "Will President Trump be impeached, assassinated, or ousted in the coup?" So that's where we are. That's the enemy's agenda, and they're not going to stop unless we bring this structure down. Now, the fact is that even though the government is shut down and they can't vote on it now, if the House Intelligence Committee votes to release this memo to the public, there's a rule in the House. If a select committee deems that the material in this memo is so important for the public to see, it can be released just by a vote of the House Select Committee. And then the president has 5 days to veto it or not. And I don't think it would be too likely, do you, that President Trump would veto this memo. If the American people get to see what has been done in their name, I'll just read a couple quotes. You have Matt Gaetz, Republican, Florida, who read the memo, who is saying, I think that this will not end just with firings. I believe there are people that will go to jail. I'm very persuaded by the evidence. It became clear to me why Senator Grassley and Senator Graham felt it so important to refer this matter for criminal prosecution. You don't get to undermine our country, undermine our elections, and then simply get fired. So I think there will be criminal implications here. And he calls this a palace coup. That's very accurate. Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio. What I read is as bad as I thought. Every American must see to it and understand what the FBI is up to. Scott Perry, Republican, Pennsylvania. You think about, is this happening in America or is this the KGB? That's how alarming this is. These are quotes. Mark Meadows, Republican, North Carolina. He says, it's troubling, it's shocking. Part of me wishes I had never read this because I don't want to believe those kinds of things could be happening in this country that I call home and I love so much. But let me tell you, what is now coming out against what has been done to President Trump, this is what was done, and worse, to Lyndon LaRouche. I say worse because LaRouche wasn't a president. He ran 8 presidential campaigns. He wasn't a billionaire. And I will also point out that everybody has heard all Mr. Dick Durbin, as Trump likes to call him, Dickie Durbin. We in the LaRouche movement called him Little Dickie Durbin. And that goes back to the days that Pete and myself and some of us here were in Chicago when we had run a slate of candidates. In fact, Pete ran for governor. We had Lieutenant Governor Mark Fairchild, Secretary of State Janice Hart. We had a whole slate of candidates, and 2 of them won the Democratic primary in 1986. And you should have seen the fireworks. I mean, it was explosive attacks on us media, but it was really a lot of fun. And Dick Durbin, it turns out, when LaRouche qualified to get matching funds, I mean, we have a real movement. We've done enormous amount of work over decades. We're known generations. I mean, I often talk to people who tell me, yeah, my dad or my granddad, he loved LaRouche. You have there's like not a mythology, but there's when you dig deep, there's a certain respect that exists for Lyndon LaRouche because he fought the fight. Well, Durbin went to the floor of the House, and guess what? Called Lyndon LaRouche a racist. Found original, and tried to get the matching funds reversed that we qualified for. Of course, we could not succeed. Now, be aware. There's a lot I could say more about this. What's coming out on the memo. There's an article by a prosecutor, retired federal prosecutor. Her name is Sidney Powell. She's written a lot of very interesting things. If you want to read more, you can look her up. She wrote a piece in the Daily Caller called "Stop Robert Mueller's Mission Creep." And as she said, as these congressmen have seen this memo, they are seeing evidence it was indeed a case of creeps on a mission. And she goes through how the decision to allow the FISA, the Federal Intelligence Surveillance Act, to be used, in which the FBI apparently took the NSA data, spying, and vetted it or gave it to unqualified private contractors, perhaps Fusion GPS being one of them. Now, this is so egregious, it's almost so hard to believe, but it's all coming out. It's going to come out. And but you have to be aware that the enemy isn't going to stop at this. They didn't stop with the Russiagate, which really, frankly, has worn itself out, although they keep attempting to turn everything back on Russia. But there's a very dangerous neocon faction in the administration. In other words, President Trump is, yes, he's the president, but you've got a total war over what our policy is going to be. Is it going to be the 4 laws of Lyndon LaRouche, joining the New Silk Road, ending these unnecessary wars on the planet, and really once and for all? What if we had a world in which we were working together in a cooperation to ensure everybody had food, had water, had sewage systems, like they don't have, for example, in Haiti, since that became such an issue. And there's very dangerous potential here if we don't bring this coup down and fast. And I'm just emphasizing that because it seems like things are moving so fast right now, you almost want to say it's going to happen on its own. No, we have to push this. But particularly the question of the British, because the head of the defense agency, Mattis, has put out a national strategy defense document. And this is the unclassified version. There is a classified version as well, in which he says that the central challenge to the United States is not terrorism, China and Russia. So this is what the defense secretary would have us preparing for. And, you just think about, prior to that military strategy was the National Intelligence Summary, I think it was it McMaster put that out? Well, who was before McMaster? Remember what happened? Was you had, tell me his name. General Michael Flynn, right, who was the original choice of President Trump. And he was an excellent fellow. He wanted to do things like nuclear energy plants in the Middle East, which is exactly what we've been talking about for years. So this is the war, and you see it in Tillerson. Tillerson will make a speech, such as he did this week in Vancouver, British Columbia, at a conference on North Korea, in which China and Russia were not invited to attend. The 16 countries that were invited were all part of the war against North Korea, years ago in the 40s. And China and Russia were not invited to attend. Tillerson made some pretty outrageous statements there. But then when he did this private meeting with the news media, he was much different. So I think that's a reflection that his speeches are being written, and he's reading them, but he may, and President Trump may have very different views from what you are hearing about what is being said against Russia and China. We know that's true. So the key to make the world happy is we have to push this economic development plan. Now, I just wanted to show a couple photos, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kesha, just to give you an idea of what has unfolded just in the last week, actually. This is a photograph from Bolivia of the inauguration of a China-built San Jose hydroelectric plant. And this will allow, I was looking at some articles on it, and 2014 they were just talking about it was going to happen. It's still, let's show the next one. It's already functioning, 4 years. Yeah, show the next one. So why can't we do this? We can do this. It's this question of, you have to live to the future, and that's where China has had a vision. They're just sweeping countries into this vision, and which clearly President Trump is very attracted to. By the time they will complete 2 more of these hydroelectric dams in Bolivia, I believe within the next few years, not only will Bolivia be completely self-sufficient in electricity, they will be able to export electricity. Now, the next map I want to show. Because this is what happens when people are happy, when people get the idea, we have a right to a future.
In Norway, they have so much hydroelectricity, they can subsidize renewable energy in surrounding countries and make them look good when they don't deserve it. So, but Norway is not one of these still countries that we can learn so much about.
Right.
Whereas Bolivia,
right,
is on its way out of that status.
In fact, China intends to make Bolivia the electricity hub of the entire continent. And China's having a major conference on the question of the Caribbean and South America right now. By the way, just think about it. The big issue that supposedly shut down the government was a disagreement on immigration. Well, look, if you have a plan of economic development, people are not going to want to leave their country. They're going to want to develop their country. I mean, we've said this for decades. The last thing I just want to point out is the rail line that has been built from the Djibouti to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And I think it was just given, and if you haven't seen YouTube videos on it, I really urge you to pull them up and look at them. This trip would take normally 3 days. It's now 10 hours. And if you look at some of the videos, and they interviewed some of the Ethiopians that have done similar things in Kenya, in which the population is being educated to run the trains, repair the trains, build the trains. It's not just something where China's going in there and going to move the raw materials out. It's not a colonial policy. But the people are totally happy. They haven't had a sense of the future for so long. Now they've got a sense that the future is very bright, young people. And I think that's what we're going to have a chance to do this year with this slate of candidates kicked off by Kesha Rogers, and what we could do with that kind of a vision for the future. And if we defeat this coup, as I think we're in a process to do, I want to close with one more thing on the question of the Democrats versus Republicans. We can put the lights back on. We've been told by some very leading Democrats that there isn't a complete consensus in the Democratic Party on this Russiagate by any means, and that there's a lot of Democrats very concerned about the question of national security. Think of people like Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. There are others. So just have a sense when you're talking to people, get the label. People are completely confused by just a barrage of fake news, but that there's really an opening now for this kind of dialogue we're creating of how we end this coup, end the terrorism, end the wars, and launch this into economic development. So, Michelle? Please. So up and down?
Yeah.
Okay. The new system here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and you're going to have to excuse me because I have my nice raspy voice today. But anyway, we are very much in a transformation for mankind right now, and I really appreciate what Marcia did at the end here, because it goes directly into what I want to discuss as there we go. Okay, so as all of you in here know, and those who are new who may not know, my name is Kesha Rogers, and I am a independent candidate for the 9th Congressional District of Texas, here in this area, the Southwest Texas area where we are right now, and I'm running against Al Green. And this is a very important race because, as Marcia was saying, my campaign is not unknown to people for actually causing fireworks. And Marcia talked about some of the campaigns we've had in the past, working alongside the economist LaRouche, who have actually gone out there on the street and waged a campaign for the future of mankind based on the idea that we were going to completely abolish geopolitics, the threat of war, the threat of economic collapse, which has so much devastated for many
decades now our national interest. And the problem is that you don't have enough candidates who are actually putting themselves out there with this commitment to the campaign that which my campaign represents and which we now have launched as an initiative with the LaRouche PAC, which I am fully in support of, which I believe is absolutely the critical campaign of the campaign to build the future and the campaign to win the future. Now, what is this? What does this require? Well, first of all, we have to eliminate all of the insanity that has dominated our political interest to this day. And I can tell you about insanity as I'm taking on the insanity of grandstanding Al Green, who would rather be focused on the impeachment based on no evidence whatsoever of President Trump and based on race baiting and fraud. The idea that, as Marcia pointed out earlier, now what we know about the individuals who claim that they had knowledge of the president making racial slurs about the countries of Africa and Haiti was one who has promoted racism himself against the development of nations, against the development of our own nation, such as people like Dick Durbin, Dirty Dickie Durbin, who has been a total, just someone who has acted absolutely against everything that my campaign and the LaRouche movement has stood for. Now, what we do know about the reality of what's going on in this district and what the reality of what the people of the United States, as represented also here in the 9th Congressional District, are facing, is a total economic breakdown crisis. And the campaign to win the future right now is a campaign that is not just for the United States, but it is to determine the fate of our nation along with the fate of mankind. The question of, will more candidates actually stand up and take the responsibility that we have a unique mission in front of us right now? We have now close to 10 days before the President of the United States gives his State of the Union address, after now being in office for close to a year. The question is not to sit back and wait for people to say, what is that going to be? How will the president respond? But the American people have to actually take responsibility. And that responsibility is in immediately educating and equipping yourself with the tools and resources for what is going to be the defining concept of an economic recovery program for the United States. And that economic recovery program does not start with Wall Street bailout interest, does not start with stock market values. And this is something that even the President of the United States has to learn himself. And we have been on a full-scale mobilization to make sure that everyone that we encounter understands that the solutions that must be put on the table right now are very much centered around Lyndon LaRouche's core economic laws. But I'm going to go into that in a second, because before I go to the four laws, this is what I want to give you a sense of as to what we're up against right now. And I've showed these images before, but what we've experienced is a total disintegration and breakdown, not just of the physical economy, but of the culture overall. And the culture of the United States has been targeted by a lack of optimism, has been targeted by drugs and war, and a total collapse. Now, what this is showing just recently, there was a report that was released on increased opioid epidemic in Harris County, right here, which very much dominates the district in which we live in. And you just think about it, that in an area where the Al Green represents a constituency, which is one of the poorest constituencies in the state and also really in the nation. And there are close to, as it said, it's showing here, more than 33,000 opioid-related deaths in the United States in 2015. Texas alone has had 2,588 opioid-related deaths. And in Harris County, that's accounted for 12.3% of those deaths. That's about 318 in 2015. Now, just today, there was an article in the Houston Chronicle, I'm sorry, not Houston Chronicle, but from KHOU, called "The Opioid Epidemic on the Rise in Houston. Houston police armed with tools to fight opioid overdoses," in ISD police armed with spray to combat overdoses in the school system. So the Houston Independent School District police officers have now been given a Narcan spray so that when young students go into an overdose reaction from drugs, then they can immediately, there's about 400 of these Narcan sprays available that they can actually spray the spray, and it'll immediately stop them from going into an overdose that could actually cause death, that could stop the death. Now, this is what we're dealing with. The second, just to show you the increased rate of homelessness, the impact on Houston. You have, as has been reported recently, 113,294 homeless children in Texas for 2014 to 2015 school year. And this was a couple of years ago, so the rate has not declined. You have Houston is number one in Texas with 26,497. That's about 23%. And the next highest is Richardson, which is in the Dallas area. So now, if people aren't looking at this reality and saying, what is it that what are we thinking about in this country as our priority right now? How are we going to unite every single person? Congress members have to get together. The fact of the matter is, now, as Marcia was just saying, we're debating in Congress as to against the livelihood of the people of this state and really of this nation. When we say that we're going to have a government shutdown, but as a part of that government shutdown, what's one of the things they're debating? Well, we may not be able to afford to give the funding for Harvey relief, for the billions of dollars in Harvey damage that was done, where we're talking about lives lost because of negligence, criminal negligence. And the fact of the matter is that if the funds are not put into the aid and relief and rebuilding from the standpoint of taking top priority for rebuilding our national infrastructure. Because if we had the infrastructure in place, if we had the dams, we had the reservoirs, we had a functioning physical economy, this would not have happened. And I can speak from personal experience that this was criminal negligence, and the losses were abundant and should not have happened. And so what are you seeing right now? As a result of it, how many more people do you think are homeless, are out on the streets? Because this happened, this is statistics before Harvey. So how many more children do you think are at risk right now of being strung out on drugs? But is Mr. Green worried about that? Not really. Not at all. This is what he should be worried about. Now, as said, we have a solution. And as someone who's been working with Lyndon LaRouche for the past 15 plus years now, and I started as a, what we call a youth member, young person, and this not so young anymore, but I've come to learn a bit in my LaRouche school education. And one thing that I know is that I have the experience and the understanding of what it takes to lead and what it takes to ensure that we can have a future. You can just leave that on. Yeah, just leave it on. I think they can see it fine. And so, as many of you have seen, there is a shift that is going on in the world. That shift is to eradicate totally poverty. That has to be our mission. That is my mission as independent candidate for the 9th Congressional District. That has to be the mission of every single candidate who is running for political office at this present time, as we are faced with the greatest financial and economic breakdown. You're looking at a situation that our priorities in the United States have to change. The number one thing, there's two measures that have to be taken. First and foremost, the U.S. has to get on board the New Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative. What the nation of China has committed to in terms of bringing all nations together for a common interest of mankind and win-win collaboration, as the president of China calls it, and which President Trump has been strongly fond of. We haven't necessarily said we solidly join the Belt and Road Initiative, but I believe that if more independent-minded candidates were actually making this their focus, there would be a total transformation in the optimism of the country, of our nation, in collaboration with China, with Russia, with other nations. But right now, as Marsha said, we are in warfare right now. The warfare is against those individuals, against that system of geopolitical system, who would rather keep people backwards and uninformed, keep the rather geopolitical system of the British Empire that people like Barack Obama before and Dick Durbin and other people work on behalf of. But the reality is this is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is a question of good versus evil, really, and the nature of man versus animal. The idea that human beings have to commit itself to the creative progress of every single human being on the planet. That's what China is doing right now in its mission to eradicate poverty. Now, I believe that we can do that in the United States. We have, I think it's close to 42 million people who are classified in poverty, impoverished in the United States. Well, what is it going to do to, what is it going to take to eradicate that poverty? First of all, these measures would be a number one start to actually doing that. And I think it's important, this week we honored and celebrated the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. And many of the people in this room here actually participated in a very profound, had a very profound effect with us as we marched down the streets in the Martin Luther King parade this week. and had the visual imagery of U.S. joining the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road, and that all the nations around the world coming together in harmony and unity around an economic solution for mankind. And I was just reminded that as I was reading just recently a book by Dr. King called Call to Conscience, he talks about not just racial disparities and overcoming racism, but that the real threat to mankind's freedom was the threat of economic disparity. And I think that's absolutely right. I mean, and this is something that actually plagues people all around the planet. But that's changing because as we saw with the beautiful development of the infrastructure and the platforms of technology and development that are continuing to rapidly increase through the efforts and the works of China's commitment, not even to just its own country, but to nations and to countries around the world to eradicate poverty, development of the railway system from Nairobi to Ethiopia, what we just saw here, and various other projects going on. We need that here in the United States. And it's not a difficult task if we commit ourselves not to the interest of corporate Wall Street bailouts, and if we commit ourselves to these very pertinent solutions that LaRouche has put on the table, but that are not just really, these ideas are fundamental to the development of our nation, to the foundation of our country, going back to the concepts of the American system of political economy, going back to the concepts of of Alexander Hamilton's first Treasury Secretary. So again, just to lay out what the measures are that must be taken, and then I want to develop them just a little bit in context. But those measures include the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall banking reorganization. This was the law of the land in 1933 of Franklin Roosevelt, and was the law for many decades until it was taken down. And this must be immediately reinstated as the first and foremost priority. Wipe out the Wall Street speculation and wipe out the derivatives market. Secondly, we have to have a return to a Hamiltonian national banking system as defined by Alexander Hamilton, and really was the concept and the basis of President Abraham Lincoln's greenback policy and President Franklin Roosevelt's Reconstruction Finance Corporation. And just think about this from the context of, if we had these types of programs in place, do you think we would have to be arguing over pennies for Harvey relief? Probably not. We would actually have the credit in place so that we would have no stopping of the progress that's needed.
A lot of money on Narcan too.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. And the third measure is a credit system for jobs, and this is a very important, because we're not just talking about going out and digging ditches, and we're talking about high-skilled unleashing the creative potential of every single person from birth on. And as this means that you have to have a vibrant education system based on teaching classics and teaching geometry and the discoveries that are needed for advancing the science and technological progress, scientific and technological progress of the country, of the nation. And you also are looking at the creation of a credit system for the idea that you want to develop direct trillions plus dollars, unlimited amounts of federal credit toward high technology and productivity, productive employment. We have to bring our industries back, bring our manufacturing. This is something that the President of the United States has been talking about. But reality is that it's not going to be done through practical means. It's going to be done through direct scientific means, direct credit invested into these large-scale projects, not by having some small amounts of money dribbled here and dribbled there from, and particularly it's not going to be done effectively by the private sector without a national mission orientation. The private sector can play a role, but that role is going to be played by having a top-down national mission that is going to re-inspire the optimism of the country again. And this is what gets us to the last measure of LaRouche's 4 laws to save the economy, which is to launch a crash program to develop the fusion power and greatly expand NASA's human space exploration program. And many of you know that this has been a major priority of my campaign for Congress and something that I've really taken seriously as a fundamental basis of what is needed right now to restore the optimism and restore the commitment again to a true economic and scientific mission for the country. And this has to still stand. This has to be recognized as, if we're going to actually do away with the threat of poverty, the way that we're going to end poverty is that we have to have a recommitment to a fusion driver, science driver crash program that's going to completely transform our economy to a new platform, on the economic platform, on the basis of just unleashing every single breakthrough in scientific and economic progress that is essential for moving this nation forward. And we've seen this before. People older than me in here were optimistic and inspired by President John F. Kennedy and what he unleashed with the optimism and the inspiration of the Apollo mission. And I was just thinking about it, that if we had something now close to 5% of the budget, as we did during that time, or might even need a little bit more for NASA to generate higher rates of spin-off and technology, as we did under the Apollo mission. We're talking about, right now, it was just a hearing in Congress that was on the commercial space flight, and NASA, commercial space companies, and NASA is now saying that the commercial space companies, which is obvious, are not prepared. They do not meet the standards to start to send human beings into space because there's safety risks there. And most people know that the commercial space company, their number one priority is not really safety. It's not, but it is the profit margin. And when the profit margin becomes priority over human life and safety, this is when we have a problem. And this would not have been condoned under the Apollo mission and the system. And yes, we had losses. As one Congress member pointed out, this next week here, we're going to be commemorating the the loss of the Challenger, Columbia, and Apollo 1 missions. And this makes us reflect on the responsibility that we have to ensure that every single, to ensure safety, but to ensure that our commitment is not to profit margins, but is to human life on every aspect of our economy, whether it's sending human beings into space or whether it's protecting human life right here on Earth from drug overdoses, homelessness, and all of the other crises that we're facing. And we can actually overcome these threats to mankind. One of the biggest threats we're faced with right now on a galactic level is the threat of homelessness and suicide and drug overdoses is facing us right here. But we also, as a species, face even a threat of the annihilation of the species on the planet through what's now been said that we're now seeing one of the closest asteroids to come near the planet. And we're seeing this from the standpoint of that if we don't have our priority, we can really be caught off guard here. We can be caught off guard from the standpoint that if we don't come together as a humanity to address these concerns and these issues that are facing mankind, then and actually have the commitment to a space program which is going to protect and defend mankind from the strategic threats that face the planet as a whole, then it's going to be our fault if we don't do something about it. Now, okay. So this, just to go into this fourth law a little bit more here and give us a sense of what it is that President John F. Kennedy, during his presidency and during the period of his announcement of the Apollo mission, what Kennedy intended was, the idea was not just a snap one-way mission, a mission to the moon and return to Earth safely, and we're done. Been there, done that. It was actually what he had in mind in terms of direction for nuclear development, in the development of nuclear power, the development in actually addressing the resource depletion here on Earth, that everything that we may be missing here on Earth could be found and established and mined and developed in space. And so the people who were very prominent in being a part of the mission of the astronauts of going into space, such as Harrison Schmitt and others, actually came to understand that very well, is that space was our outpost for mankind, as craft therapists said, to fulfill man's extraterrestrial imperative. And that extraterrestrial imperative is that there was no limit to the growth and progress of mankind. And this is what we need to start to think about and talk about. This is the type of discussion that political leaders should be having right now. The idea that we have to say there's limited budget, we can only afford $19 billion for our space program, that's it, do what you can with it. Don't kill anybody, but you're not getting anything else. What kind of talk is that? And limited budgets and limited resources and really enough room for limited people on the planet. So this is the insanity that has to be eliminated from our thinking process. We have to actually have a thinking process in our society that nothing is impossible. Failure is not an option, and that we actually have to commit ourselves again to the highest level of scientific advancements and technology. And one of the things that is absolutely essential in the core laws of Lyndon LaRouche is the commitment to an increased energy density of, of advanced nuclear and fusion technologies for developing the unlimited potential of mankind, both here on and off the planet. But if we actually hadn't, as you look at this now here, what it's showing is the A is showing where the projected direction of development in terms of energy sources was coming from during the 1962, or around the time of President John F. Kennedy, and then B is the rapid rate of increase of the development of where Lyndon LaRouche saw that we should have been, that as we transform our energy density to higher and higher states of energy from, simple wood burning, which you're thinking of this also with the rate of increase of the population. As the population increase, then could you actually sustain a growing culture based on these levels of technology, these levels of energy? And the answer is really no. But what we're seeing right now is that there is now starting to become a recommitment by some nations to the rapid paced development of nuclear technologies, and that there's now there is research being done at a rapid pace on fusion technologies. As a matter of fact, hold on, let me see what's the next. Yes. Okay. You have this what China's doing right now in terms of not only becoming number one in the development of nuclear energy and technologies in its own country, but also around working with nations around the world. And what this is, sorry, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is called China's third generation nuclear reactor, Hualong-1. And this is now based in the Fujian province with a capacity of 1,200 megawatts. Really been from the second generation reactors, a improved fuel technology in thermal efficiency and safety, and it also has been shown to lower maintenance costs. There was an article in, I believe it was Xinhua, that was talking about this development of this third generation reactor. It says that the core part of the technology, the reactor, the container of the nuclear fuel will begin installation on Wednesday, and is expected to be finished by the end of this month. So they're moving quite rapidly. Now, at the same time, you look at this in terms of the importance for nuclear technologies or space exploration. And right now, it was just shown in I think it was a press conference, a telephone press conference. Joel actually might have had a chance to listen to it. I know, but I didn't get a chance to listen to it. But they were just announcing okay, one of our colleagues, Marcia, listened to it. But the NASA has now announced, and this is something that came out a little while ago that they're following up with, on the kilopower nuclear electric program. for space nuclear reactor program that's going to be tested with the nuclear core this spring. So it's about 10 kilowatts of power, and the system is going to be used for powering the surface of planetary bodies, such as the surface of the moon and or the surface of Mars, and to power, basically to power habitats. And this is something that China is definitely moving toward, is talking about. The European Space Agency is discussing working with China, because if we're going to develop the resources that are to be offered on the moon, such as the plentiful resource of helium-3, which, think about it, if we could actually devise the technologies and the development for mining helium-3 on the moon, that would be a #1 fuel source for powering and electrifying the Earth. We wouldn't have to worry about things such as what we potentially faced this past week, where my husband got a letter from TXU, Texas, the energy company, and they said, well, so that we can avoid the potential threat of, basically to avoid overuse of the grid, of the system, then we need people to keep their electricity down to about 68 or so, because if everybody actually uses the max amount of electricity, it could cause very strong problems. They didn't really say blackouts, but this is what they were saying. It could cause brownouts or blackouts. And I remember, actually, this is not new. When I was running for Congress before, I was standing out in the cold and doing a video statement. I actually found this video statement and was going after talking about what was happening in Texas and in Mexico, because we were actually getting some of our energy being transferred in from Mexico at the time, and there was freezing cold, and there was potential for blackouts going on because our grid couldn't actually sustain the level of usage for the amount of energy usage that was ongoing. And so, but this is where we're at right now. And so, but the problem is solvable. And if we weren't sitting here talking about we got to build more windmills and more solar panels, but we were going with the highest level of scientific advancement and technology. As a matter of fact, Mike just sent me a video today, and he should send that around to people. There was a guy who had just been transformed and saying, well, I used to be one of these nuclear power deniers, and now I'm just completely turned around. And he looked at the fact that Germany, thinking of insanity of wanting to shut down your nuclear power plants and go fully with this whole process of solar and wind, was actually facing net losses of, they increased their solar and wind output by about 11%, but the losses were even greater. And so, and a lot of people are coming up and saying there's no replacement. It is only through the development of nuclear technology, nuclear energy, and really what we're saying, to advance that to the highest level and go to a full-scale fusion platform, that's going to actually give us the important step towards having the total unlimited resources and power for powering the Earth 10 times plus over. So now, and how are we going to do that? We're going to do that through understanding man's mission and purpose as our purpose in the universe, our purpose in the solar system, and that we really have to have a commitment to the overall purpose of the progress of mankind. And this is what we should be really taking up the mantle on in the political leaders of this country right now have to have a new vision. And that new vision and purpose has to be on eradicating poverty, bringing a sense of optimism again. What this is a depiction of Kraft Erica's drawing that he did of his Selenopolis, which is a city on the moon, powered by nuclear power. And I don't have the other imagery, but it shows beautiful, full city that is really premised on the idea of even what Mr. LaRouche developed, which would be a Renaissance city. And this is what we need to create right now, thinking about not drug overdose cities and cities plagued with homelessness and complete despair and pessimism and complete anti-optimism, but cities that are Renaissance cities that there is no limitation to the progress of the people. And people might say, well, you don't sound like a real politician to me, because that don't sound practical, and you need to talk about things that are real, not building renaissances, because that's not going to happen. Well, it's only not going to happen if you allow for the defeat of our citizenry to prevail. But as we said at the very beginning, we are launching the campaign to win the future. So I wanted to give you a sense of this perspective of what it really takes to, what is going to be required to win the future. You really can't see that, but that is just an imagery of what the future is going to look like as China is now readying itself for a launch, for a far side lunar landing that's going to be taking place by the end of 2018. And this is a picture of the Chang'e 5, is the rover that actually captured pictures around as it was coming back around the moon to bring samples, getting ready to bring samples back to, lunar samples back to the Earth. And these lunar samples, as we've seen through our Apollo missions before, and now even further development, even further breakthroughs, are showing us that there are no limits to growth. There are no limits to the resources that mankind needs for increased development. And so we can cut out the budget cuts and cut out all of the measures that say we have to hold our progress back, because we don't. We should take an example from what the Chinese are doing, that there is no limits to growth, and that we actually have to commit ourselves to the total eradication of poverty. And we have the know-how and the means to do so. So I'm going to stop with that, and I hope that has provoked some thoughts and questions and inspired you a bit.
One of the things we tell people is really important. I mean, I think that the way we start to really fight this, we have to start with the healthcare is healthcare. I think we need to see what is even the people, or the what the ecosystem are offering like that. It's really the alarm, and I'm happy that we on this.
artists, people, and young people are looking for something, also have that interest, that,
Right.
and it's like it's too accessible.
Right.
Those guys could go to pharmacy to make some Mexico. I don't know. I mean, I'm not really that, but I mean, they seem like they're getting it. I've seen, I mean, it's really, really, I'm seeing some families that they're destroying on young guys, I mean, need to go to the university, to go to, ended up in jail because, young people, and it's not even wasting everywhere,
That's true.
and I think something that you tackle. And that's why I say here in the healthcare, what they're doing, it's too easy to just what they're doing, I mean, and I want to go to see some complete solution of the healthcare. That's for the opioid. And then I'm moving a little bit and go to the focus. I mean, I've been shocked. I'll be honest. I'm new in this city, and to be really is a city that I love, and it's, I see a lot of opportunities here and everything. I was in the bus, and going from, going from PSU and to go to transit, and I go to PSU and go to UH. I've seen all those tent cities, the people.
Tent cities, yes.
I mean, like that's one of I mean, I see in this city, how come we can have that much poverty? I was really shocked. He marked me so well. I was thinking the whole time my trip, I had a long trip and coming back, I mean, yeah, I don't know how much I guess, I was very shocked. So, I'm happy to explain that. I think that as a public servant, every citizen, I know some of them from what I heard, like kind of high. We have that the city has some plans, something that was why what the city is going, and people have a plan that's trying to remove the guys, and like
Right,
I mean,
right.
like,
Yeah, I've heard that.
even for the young people, like it's really good to see. I mean, you travel, come to the city, and it's very very damaging for youth, and I think that
It's damaging, but it's real, and I mean it's definitely not just Houston. It's across the country right now. I mean, it was a wake up call again. We see it every single day in terms of and for people who are on the listening online who may not have heard the question or the comments. It's really pertaining to what I was bringing up on the rapid increased rate of homelessness and the drug overdose. And I was just taken aback as we were in the Martin Luther King parade. And we were walking through the parade, and the route took us right past a tent city. There were about 50, 100 tents of homeless people. And they weren't all singing, there were some families. I actually saw a couple of children out there. This is what we're dealing with. And as I said, it's real negligence for the past several decades of breakdown in our system. And that breakdown has been, in a certain sense, intentional. There hasn't been a Republican versus Democratic fault. It's been an intentional policy to keep people impoverished and undernourished and underfed and everything else. And why is this the case? Why have we gone along with this? Well, because people haven't understood that there is a real enemy apparatus that is dominating our system, political system of thinking. That commitment to money, that commitment to Wall Street bailouts over the well-being and the interests of the people of the nation. And we can change that. I'm looking at the fact that So over the past 30 years, China has lifted 700 million people out of poverty. And in the past year, past 5 years, another 10 million. And they're committed to eradicating poverty. It's not just a slogan. And what Dr. King said is that as long as you had the curse of poverty in our nation, that until we through the direct we civilize ourselves by the direct and total annihilation or an abolishment of poverty. I don't have the quote directly in front of me, but he just said we have to have the total abolishment of poverty. That's where you're going to gain true freedom. And this is what we got to work on in the country, because it is devastating. Every single day you drive out of your house, and I think people everywhere are seeing that this is not just in some parts of the city that they can keep contained. Even in the more affluent areas, you're starting to see both the opioid drug overdoses and the homelessness. So it just shows you again that the way to get out of this is what we just said here. These 4 laws are essential to saving this country. And people have to take the responsibility and take this up, because the key right now is we have to have a functioning healthcare system that's not trying to make a side deal. If I give you some more drugs and some opioids and painkillers and so forth, one thing is I can keep getting paid. I don't have to go through the system. I mean, it's all kinds of crazy stuff like that. And then the people who are on it, where's their optimism about the future? What's the future represent? They're just saying, hey, look, just give me the drugs. Or they're going out to sell the drugs because that's where they're going to make the money. Because get some more drugs. Exactly. So we got a problem on our hands that can be solved. And we got to think about the young people as to this is their future that's on the line right now. Those people who have been growing up in the last decades of the Bush-Obama era, and even, going further back, going really to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. There has been lack of mission, lack of optimism, lack of future. And we can't stand for that any longer.
I just want to say that we have to have a functioning mental health system.
Yes.
It was dismantled in the 1960s. And the consequence of that is a lot of some elements of the homeless. There's a dynamic in the government attitude towards the mentally ill, put them in prison instead of getting care for them. And poverty, there's a dynamic there. It's not just one or the other. But you do not have a functioning mental health care system at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, VA system. Yeah, we got the veterans. We have a lot of work to do.
That's a good number of now.
Yeah.
Are the veterans who come back and they have issues that they need to have addressed that nobody's bothering to address? I have a brother and friend who have tried to get access to VA, and it is impossible for them to get the simple treatment.
Yes, I can attest to that personally. I have a family member who's in the VA hospital right now, having to go and check, make sure they're okay all the time.
I just wanted to point out something that Vladimir provoked. This horror show that you see is, of course, the antithesis of the kind of optimism that is being spread around the world by China, or China is doing. And I think it shouldn't be understated how intense the war is over here in this country. Because what Lynn and Helga have done is through the pamphlets, launch a real devastating attack against the people that enforce this Wall Street system on it, this British imperial system on it. And we're winning. But they are absolutely determined if they can't have their system, then they want us all incinerated. So the battle is to stop food so that we can free Trump from McMaster, so we can free Trump from Mattis. And the game they're playing, trying to, right now, there's two defenses by them to say Russia and China are the enemy, Russia and China are the enemy. We have to reorganize everything, Russia and China are the enemy. This is exactly what Trump is saying isn't so. Right, so if we want to have the optimism, if we want the happiness, that Marshall was referencing, that we have to defeat this king, because they are going to kill this country. And look at what you see is the necrosis of our society as a result of their activities. So that's what we're fighting.
I would just like to say that I strongly suspect the visible homeless population is the iceberg, and there are a lot of many people who are barely making by, and they're only a couple of paychecks or a couple of pensions.
That's so true.
From being in exactly the same position. If they think, well, those homeless people deserve to be there, it could never happen to me. They might just be getting a wake-up call very soon, unless we do our job.
That's absolutely right. Yes.
I have a personal question for you, like future political candidate and for your political support.
Yes.
And I see that somehow maybe you find some simple words, like if you mentioned Kennedy, what would you do for America, then Martin Luther King. And I like that if you concentrate on this negativity, we all know. But as a young political leader, you need to have a vision. What vision you have in the future for political system? Because we all know Democrats, Republicans, and I like that you support President Trump, that he brings his part, the word fake news. What couple words you create and you put on your pages of your platform and your political movement, and people will say, don't know about Betsy. Maybe it's a little bit romantic. I like your word. Extraterrestrial possibilities.
Hey, I like it. Extraterrestrial.
But maybe like Kennedy, something, the moon, a star.
Yes.
And people will say, and in your agenda is to build on something positive.
I agree.
People will come and knock in the door. I'm serious.
I know. So the agenda has to be great.
The slogan, yeah.
Yeah, the slogan.
The keyword.
The great projects for a great America. We got to build America. No, it's true. I agree. This is what I've been discussing here. Like you said, we know that we are really faced with quite all kinds of problems, but the solutions are there. That was the point. And we have to bring a sense of optimism back. We have to build the country again. And, the president said, make America great again. Well, I take it a step further and say great projects for a great America, because we have to put the nation back to work on a mission to build America. And so I think, you're absolutely right. And young people need that positive, and the whole nation really needs that positive optimism and direction. So we'll keep working on that, but I'll work on that extraterrestrial imperative. Extraterrestrial possibilities. Yes.
United States works directly with Russia, India, China, Japan, Egypt, and others. And we could solve all the problems, the primary problems of the world. Fresh water for every human being. food for everybody, electricity and sanitation for every home, education, healthcare, you know, and then
And free.
Choice of millions of jobs. You know, there are millions of jobs. Don't just turn out like this. It's not that difficult. That's what's possible. That's what the British all free.
That's right. That's right. We're going to keep freaking them out because we're going to win. Campaign to win the future. That's absolutely right. I'm taking that slogan for my own. Okay, thank you all. And we can continue to have discussions, but thank you for being here.